how you doing?
Where the fuck you been, Foley? And what the fuck is this?
It's blue slip.
What in the hell you need $1,000 for?
Little flash money.
Flash money? Well, let's see here. $2,000 for a suit, $200 for a tie, a requisition order for a Ferrari. I don't want to see any more of these blue slips. When am I going to see some arrest slips?
I know that you're getting upset, and I know that you have reason to be upset, but let me tell you something, Chief. I am close. I'm so close now. I'm closer than I've been, and it's making me crazy because I can smell it. It's in the air, and I smell it. Do you smell it? Because I smell it.
All I smell is your bullshit. For 6 months, I've been pouring money down a bottomless hole. Where the bad guys at the end of this rainbow?
Wait a second. Look, I just thought that if there was a problem...
Don't think, Axel. It makes my dick itch.
Do you expect me to talk?
Hello and welcome to episode 238 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm Becca and as always joined by my fellow partners in crime, Chris and Dave. How are you both?
Good evening, folks.
Oh, hello everybody.
This is a very non-Beverly Hills Cop themed introduction.
Okay. I don't really know what to say to that. I don't know if...
yeah. I mean, I don't think I had a gag to sort of inject. I mean, maybe I could sort of talk about like sort of $20 for a car, $30 for whatever it is Chris Rock says.
Yeah, that's
what
it.
the hell is this?
Yeah. I'd forgotten Chris Rock had it. Doesn't he look young there? Although
Yeah.
Chris Rock's always been older than he looks, if you know what I mean.
I think he always kind of looks the same. Like he does look like a baby face.
Yeah.
Like he's when he's like, you know, he's got a youthful appearance generally. But yeah, I think, oh my god, he looks so young.
Well, Chris Rock is now 58 years of age.
No.
Yeah, so he'd have been
Oh my
about
God.
22 here.
Yeah, definitely baby face.
Yeah, but you know, if you think about when he started to get really big, he was already well into his 30s and didn't look it.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I suppose it came not quite late, but
Yeah,
later.
Later. Yeah, certainly compared to Eddie Murphy.
Definitely.
But yeah, so what are we covering tonight?
Tonight we're going deep. Is that too many deeps? Deep undercover. As we review Beverly Hills Cop II, starring Eddie Murphy, Judge Reinhold, John Ashton, Wendy Cox, Bridget Nielsen, Jürgen Prochnow, whose name I can't pronounce, Dean Stockwell, Gilbert Gottfried, Hugh Hefner, and Chris Rock, and many more. With a score by Harold Faltermeyer, the script by Larry Ferguson, Warren Scott, and others, directed by Tony Scott, and released in 1987. I was about 3 when this came out.
Yeah, I don't think you'd even had your 3rd birthday yet.
No, probably not. No,
I guess just a word on
because I am old.
the fact that this is a very different team making this film. Now, obviously, you've still got Eddie sort of riffing and doing his own thing. But a few things to note. This is all 3 films, and in fact what is soon to be all 4 films, because we're getting one on Netflix fairly soon, depending on actors and writers' strikes and everything. But it is in the can. The film has been made.
It's coming.
But they're not going to release it till they've got actors able to promote. So I don't know when it's going to be ready. But of course it's 4 films, 4 different directors, and so... But it's also different writers. This week we've got Larry Ferguson and Warren Scarron. Now, Larry Ferguson wrote on Highlander, and he wrote on The Hunt for Red October, Alien 3. I mean, they're not all slam dunks, but there's some decent ones there, although there's also the Rollerball remake. But obviously with writers, you're never quite sure what changes between sort of pen and screen anyway. Warren Scarron's just worth mentioning because he had a much shorter career because he died 3 years after this at the age of 44 of bone cancer. But he also wrote on Beetlejuice and Batman 89. So very different sort of careers to the people who wrote last week. And of course you've got Tony Scott, which means this is a really odd feeling film in that before we go into the relative merits of it, at once it feels almost like a remake of the first film, even rehashing just general ideas of how Axel interacts with everybody and how he sort of blags his way in the city and all the rest of it. But it feels really different because it's got that Tony Scott. Even the camera angles are different.
It looks totally different.
It's
to me,
got
like,
that sort of slightly yellowy orange filter on it. That's very common.
I was mentioning on the chat that we've got like off air sort of thing. At the moment, obviously watching these films, watched Top Gun. As I went to a different screening of Maverick recently, I thought I was having a little bit of an 80s time of it. Just trying to work my way through like quite a few Tony Scott films. There's a definite, as with every kind of director and sort of creative team, there's a definite kind of look and feel to his movies.
Is that why you're sat in a leopard skin leotard with a blowwave hairstyle as we speak?
Yes, I am.
And a headband on.
Now, as I'm sure you all are,
Yeah.
with my shoulder pads and all the rest of it, my neon leg warmers.
I'm dressed like I'm in Miami Vice, to be fair. It's around the same year.
Yeah, that's
got my shades on. It's fucking dark in this living room.
But this is it. We are at the 80s.
Yeah, you were saying you said you've sort of inadvertently had a bit of a Tony Scott session because you had Top Gun yesterday or whenever it was, and of course you've watched this.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I'd say it kind of looks very different. I mean, yeah, it's obviously all kind of have a sort of look and feel about them. You pretty much watching a Tony Scott film by certain stylistic choices that that he makes. It's quite, as I say, it's quite an interesting point that we've got sort of different creative. Well, obviously this one you've kind of got more Eddie Murphy also, on a production side, and also the creative side as well, developing the story and that as well. So it's a team effort. But where you've got like different writers and different directors, they're all going to be the same story. Like the plot's almost it falls by the wayside a little bit because it's all about Axel really and kind of.
We don't care about the plot, do we? Not really.
We just care about Eddie Murphy because obviously he's a big star by this. Obviously he's very famous anyway, but he's kind of big star by this stage.
They seem to try to make more effort with like the plot, like the villains seems a lot more complex, like in terms of like what they
it's more multi-dimensional, but it's not more interesting.
No, it's a lot more kind of multi-layered.
This person is a cover for that person who's working with this person on an insurance con for this, and so on.
Yeah, it's all kind of like a long game, isn't it? It's all kind of lots of layers and lots of deception and things like that. It's a lot more, as I say, the villain's plot is a lot more complex.
I think the problem...
And then you've also kind of got like the B plot between.
But when you boil it down to, he's a bit of a failed, like he's basically the chief. Like he's like, oh shit, I'm in debt. I better.
See, it's a Bond film.
I'll do an insurance job.
Bond movies, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, secretly Bond films, people.
I got the strongest.
I'll do an insurance scam and then bugger off to some.
It's funny how the 80s, more than most decades I can think of, possibly the 60s a little bit, but it falls into a series of little micro eras. Like a 1981 film doesn't look like a 1984 film, doesn't look like a 1987 film, and so on. And this does look. I mean, it is the same director, so that will be partly why. But it's a couple of things really. It's all the filters and shades and stuff. That's very.
It's
sort
very
of Top Gun era.
1980s.
But it's also the fact that although she had a career, I'm sure, seeing Bridget Nielsen in fairly high-profile things pegs it to a 2 or 3 year period anyway. Because I mean, as she was sort of building up to be with Sly, she had sort of this sort of 2 or 3 year period, and that was
you
it.
went into a bit that last week, didn't you? And obviously we kind of see a bit more detail this right round because like we go into like Billy's like his flat, sort of home where he lives, and he's got Cobra posters, he's got he's got the Stallone posters dotted around his wall. So obviously there's a connection there, and that where Stallone was going to be in this film originally, but then he went and made Cobra instead, and one thing another. So.
Well, I was also thinking that, again, a bit like when we talked about the Rocky series, we could almost say you can identify the period because of what it looks like, particularly 5 more than any other film, but 4 as well, although because of the Cold War angle, 4 could be a couple of years earlier than it is. But also you could identify it by Sly's screen persona in a given film. And he says that himself. He says that like it went to my head. So he's a superhero in Rocky IV, and his career's starting to take a bit of a dip by the 1990s. So he's a bit more humbled. And I think that there's something of that when you look under it, I do feel Eddie Murphy's being more indulged here. And Judge Reinhold a bit, and we were reading last week, that Judge Reinhold admits himself he got rather big-headed and a little bit obnoxious on sets. And I was reading in the making of this film that Eddie Murphy started to sort of turn up late, and when they were trying to put, this was true of 3 as well. We'll talk about that more next week, but certainly in 3, John Landis was trying to put more humour in it, and Eddie Murphy was going, yeah, but I'm a grown-up now. It's like, Axel's a grown-up now. It's like he's not dicking around anymore. It's like, but apparently Eddie Murphy was late to the set a lot. He's definitely loving the way he looks even more. The suits and the kisses to the mirror and all the rest of it. So I think you can almost peg the film by the behaviour of the sort of 2 leads. And I think also when you look at the first film, yes, you can see it's a loose plot around a series of set pieces, but as Chris explained last week, that was sort of necessity being the mother of invention. That was Eddie Murphy going, what do we have? All right, just let me riff this bit. And I feel this week he's almost gone. It's more that they're indulging the star. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, well, it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, to add to how things look. This looks very the thought I had was this looks very late 80s, whereas the first one is very early 80s.
Yeah.
And it's weird how there isn't actually that much difference in years.
It's 3 years. I mean,
yeah,
in universe, it's 2 years as well.
And what astounds me about looking through the years, even from the say early 90s to late 90s. It's just how you can kind of tell films themselves look different. There's a different quality.
Well, I think we've talked about 89 to 91ish, but we talked about this on Rocky 5. There's a certain type of jumpers they wore. There's a certain type of sweaters, whatever you want to call them, around the world. Different little things about it. Peg early 90s as early 90s. That sort of Marky Mark fucking era.
There's something about how they look.
But
what I mean?
It's less noticeable through the rest of the 90s though. A 93 film doesn't look hugely different from a 98 film.
No,
except when you get that leathery subgenre,
depends on the fashions and the music.
Blade, The Matrix, Dark City. There was certainly Underworld. There was certainly a spell of 4 or 5 years where heavy leathers became the thing. Yeah. But that's about it.
But you think back to now, just think back. Inception was how long ago was Inception?
13
over 10 years.
13 years.
Yeah.
Summer of 2010.
And would you? If you could literally bring out Inception now and you would not really you think oh, fucking hell, that film looks old. Do you know what I mean?
No, I think you could literally swap it. You could literally swap it with Tenet in terms of on the timeline,
which kind of astounds me. Just how how things haven't really things have kind of stayed the same, and I don't know whether that's because we've reached a point where. We can't we're just waiting for something new to break through that'll just completely change the game because we can't really improve on what we have now, or
I think it's partly CG's gone backwards. I do think that's part of it. CG from 2010 doesn't look worse because it's a lesser tool set being used more diligently. What we've got now is better tools being rushed.
Yeah,
I don't think CG's improved at all in its execution.
It's amazing how you think of films now and how 5 years you could tell the difference in 5 years. A film came out from 5 years to 5 years. Now you would not be able to know any difference, would you? You would not be able to tell.
Only some thematic things, because if you think about, just having mentioned Bond, if you think about The Dark Knight and Skyfall. They've both got that sort of...
It's that kind of trend, isn't it, pretty much, yeah. I was trying to think of an overarching kind of strand, really, or something, obviously, because these films, they're very kind of 80s, but I would say even just, 83, 84 looks different, 2 or 3 years down the line, but because you've got a different director as well, there's also different factors to go into play as well, but, would you kind of say that, early 80s Bond film looks different to a late 80s Bond film. But obviously taking out different directors, fashions, music, stuff like
No,
that.
I think Bond is a bad example because it
Yeah,
had the
it's
same
completely
director
different.
for the whole 80s. Had the same director, and it still had
definitely.
Maurice Binder and stuff like that. What I was going to say was, look, if you look at a
If you're
film
comparing
made in, say,
Goldfinger to You Only Live Twice, for example.
no, what I was going to say was, if you compare, say, The Dark Knight and Skyfall to like a film now, what you're not picking up on is necessarily stylistic differences. You're looking at thematic things in that era, like superhero films went gritty for a while. You had a series of films where the bad guy just wanted anarchy and he let himself get captured and things like that. So that would date. And we're not saying films don't date. I think we're saying styles are not changing as fast in visual styles. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, call it what you want, but there's certain kind of like quality.
Yes, and aesthetic that goes with it.
Yeah, it's just how it looks on screen. So I mean, I'm not too versed with like film photography or whatnot, but it is a noticeable thing. There is a look, and I don't know whether that's. I mean, it's not like saying, like Casino Royale, for example. Like, there isn't much in that film that would look really dated now if it came
just
out.
technology,
like,
ellipsis on the phone.
It's just the use of the phones. That'll be the only sort of like thing you'd be going, oh, that's not fun now.
Yeah.
But outside of that, there's not a lot. I mean, it still looks great by today's standards. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't look like, oh, this is like a nearly 20-year-old film kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? It's one of the things that I've noticed recently in today's movies, how there isn't
progress
much.
has flattened out a bit.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what.
But there are still things.
It's coming thick and fast as what they were. Obviously, we're kind of we're getting there for sure. But it's just I kind of say like this film looks different to last week's film. So this one looks different, and then I'm sure a couple of years down the line it will look different again.
I'll make
and then
one
obviously
point.
when we come to Beverly Hills Cop 4, it will still look different.
Yeah. No, the one point I'll make about Bond, though, just to complete that point, though, the one thing that I would say in mitigation of that point, or to argue almost against that point, is that was the start of Daniel Craig's run, and it only finished 2 years ago, and we haven't cast another one yet. Had Casino Royale, I know this would make no sense because it's an origin story, but had Daniel Craig, if that had been Daniel Craig's one and only Bond film or last Bond film, and then we'd had another Bond who finished in, say, 2014, and then we decided because Marvel was a lot more colourful we'd go with a more colourful Bond, Casino Royale might feel more dated than it does, because basically that era of Bond, of the super serious and oh my god life isn't fun, hasn't really ended yet because it hasn't been replaced by anything. But your point still stands that you pick a random point in the 80s and you can normally say to within a year or two where it is because it was changing so quickly.
Yeah. I'm probably the same sort of 70s as well, maybe 60s.
Yeah.
But there was like something you can kind of go, yeah, that's mid to late 70s. This is probably a bit early. Do you know what I mean? There is like kind of
certainly
like,
with the 60s, you watch on Her Majesty's Secret Service and suddenly it's all a bit more flowery. It's still a 60s Bond film, but you can feel the 70s creeping in.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
If you think 8 years back from now, 2015, the year we started, Spectre released, and a film that's released today wouldn't look much different. Now compare a 1979 film to this. Totally, it's so different.
It's
like For Your Eyes Only. I mean, Your Eyes Only has that kind of like, it looks like tail end of 70s, 80s creeping in.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
It's kind of literally on that cusp, isn't it? Definitely. Yeah. But whereas I think obviously this one we kind of had like, what was it, 83, 84, now 87 as well. So kind of obviously the next one's
94, I think. 94.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a gap. So that's going to be kind of more.
Yeah.
Going to see it starts being more like. But again, you've got things sort of like fashion. You've got stylistic choices as well. You've got kind of cinematography choices, whatever camera angles, and editorial choices that were popular at the time, or that perhaps certain looks that Tony Scott wanted to achieve. But I think obviously being the 80s themselves, in terms of kind of like sort of the fashion and style and everything, like these very 80s films, obviously, just in terms of like the music, the synth, full-time score as well. Bridget Nielsen, as you say, it's just, you know, these kind of casting choices. But you know, sort of the clothes she wears and like the style, the way kind of, and obviously the type of suits that everyone wears as well. But it's very kind of specific, and again, you've got the contrast between LA and sort of Detroit as well, but not so much as we have in the last film, because that was kind of like, well, it was me trying to find some social commentary on that as well. But whereas I don't think we get that so much over here for this film for sure. But I think it's the stylistic choices of the 80s. Really,
well, think about it. Eddie Murphy in the first film, or Axl Rose. Axl Rose had done it again. Second week in a row. Okay.
Listeners, we don't advocate that you drink, but you know, you can put a penny into a jar every time Dave says Axl Rose. Use this as a drinking game.
Yeah,
take a shot every time he says Axl Rose.
Axel Foley was driving a shit tip of a car last week, and he drove it into Beverly Hills, and he sort of drove down the street in it, laughing at all these people that were sort of posh and rich and everything else. This week, I know he's playing a role, but he's driving around in an expensive suit in a Ferrari, and he flies into Beverly Hills.
Yeah, he's got an upgrade now.
And instead of being... It's the same joke, but it's executed differently, because last week he is in... I mean this purely in terms of his wealth, the character's wealth. Last week he blags his way into a hotel that's miles above his station, so he's going to be surrounded all week by rich people and, you know, and all the rest of it. This week he pulls the same trick, but he's staying in a house by himself, which doesn't have the same impact. So I do think it's a little bit of this is wealth, and everything else has gone to everybody's head. Because Axel Foley has many more sort of affectations about him than he did in the first film.
Yeah, because in the film it starts off with him where he's stepping up his game, so he looks more like the business, even though he is basically doing the same thing.
Yeah,
he's working to sort of, you know, he's working undercover to you know, to bust counterfeit credit cards this time.
Yeah. I believe one of these guys that he's talking to is Robert Pastorelli. Robert Pastorelli, I think he died, it may even have been esophageal cancer. I'm just going to look what he died of, actually. No, sorry, it was an overdose. But he's probably best known, or at least it's likely he's best known in the United States, because he was in the American version of Cracker, playing Fitz, which and it was screened in this country. I don't know how popular it was, but it was the only difference. It was known as Fitz over here, because obviously the original was called Cracker here, but Cracker about a clinical psychologist. In this country, the original, it was played by
Robbie Coltrane.
I blanked on his name for a minute. Robbie Coltrane, who's obviously known to people.
There was an era, wasn't it, where it was quite popular for our shows to be made abroad. They kind of thought, and then it kind of, I think it went backwards for a little bit, and I don't know if the remake was that popular over here. I don't know.
Wasn't there like what's the Prime Suspect? Wasn't that like done?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think so, but I'm not sure how well it went.
But the whole point of Prime Suspect it was really about that first one, where the Linda LaPlante who wrote it was clearly making a point about institutional sexism, because by this point the character is in her 40s, she's been passed over for promotion many times, the lead detective dies of a heart attack whilst investigating this murder, and she's begging to be take over, and when she does take over, she's not taken seriously by anyone around her, and all the rest of it. Once you try and make that a series, it's just a very good actress as a police detective. You've missed the point.
No, that's I think it was quite not controversial, but I think that was quite sort of shocking for the time, because it was, as they very much late 80s, early 90s.
It was 91, and it's the nature of the nature of the crimes. It was the nature of the crimes that made it shocking, because it was sexual.
For a woman to investigate.
It was sexual assault and murder crimes, and the prime suspect is John Bowe, who you'd have seen him in a lot of things, but randomly he was in like a continuation of Poldark in between the original and the remake.
My comment was it was a woman, basically. It was,
and so Zoe Wanamaker played his partner in it. Zoe Wanamaker, the daughter of Sam Wanamaker, who owned the Daily Planet in Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, which is where we get all our business news from. Yep,
100%. With that ticker going by. But I think that was why it's so controversial at the time, because it was sort of carried by Helen Mirren, basically, and because it was a woman. But as you also say, like, it was the kind of the brutal nature and how that was kind of written and portrayed in the film as well. I think that's why the series was so shocking and groundbreaking at the time. And had it been portrayed by, they say, a lesser actress than Helen Mirren, then I think it wouldn't have been as explosive as what it was, especially written by Linda LaPlante as well. So I agree.
Back to this film for a bit.
We've gone off a massive tangent.
No, so Martin Brest, who directed the first film, passed on the sequel, so he was offered it. And obviously Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson. Don Simpson must have passed soon after this. I think he may have died just after Days of Thunder, actually, Don Simpson. Jerry Bruckheimer still works now.
Don Simpson... no, this is still Don Simpson. He died not long
I thought he
after
died about...
The Rock.
I think
The Rock
was it? I thought it was earlier. I thought it was 1990.
No, it was...
But it was in the 90s.
Yeah, so the Rock was technically his... He died like before that film came out, but he had a hand in producing it.
Right,
so it was still technically...
So he died 95, 96
I think if I remember right, Con Air was like the first time where it was just Jerry Bruckheimer.
Right, okay. So it stands to reason that they've just had a massive hit, and whatever you think of Top Gun, it is one of the sort of defining films of the 80s. So they gave it to Tony Scott. Originally talk of filming it outside of the United States. Eddie Murphy was the one. Of course, Eddie Murphy's a superstar at this point. He said he didn't want to do that, so that was it. And there's a lot of things in the end result that just speak to some of these issues in that the plot feels, although there's a slightly convoluted nature to it, again, it feels a bit perfunctory. You've got to get an excuse to get him back out to Beverly Hills, and they do it by effectively rerunning the first film, really, in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
and also
it's reruns again. But I feel like the villain's plot, obviously, is more complex, but also there's a little bit of like fantastical element to it as well. So I kind of feel like they've kind of got to go. They've always got to be. They're falling over themselves to be convoluted, to be complex. It does become a bit ridiculous.
That could be a Tony Scott thing, because they said that. Well, first off, Ronnie Cox was going to be in it a lot more, but he couldn't because his shooting schedule clashed with RoboCop. And to be fair, with the end result of RoboCop, I don't have any regrets about that decision at all. But again, it's all things that if you know, you can see how cobbled together this film is, because his shooting is meant to be the major driving force of the film. But once again, having heard of this, we're immediately told he's going to be fine. So who cares, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, we're introduced to his daughter, like an old friend of Axel's. We didn't meet her in the first film, so who the fuck is she?
No, I was sort of... I've never sort of... I'll let you know, I've probably never seen these series before.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's just passed me by. Same with the Carry On movies. Like, I've now seen 3 of them, so I'm working my way through them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was sort of thinking. I don't remember her from the first
I
film.
wondered if it was a recast of the Lisa character from the first film, and then I looked it up and like, no, they're nothing to do with each other.
No, they're not related.
So then
she's very good though.
But it means, yeah, she is. She's all right actually. She doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, so she didn't go on to do much.
No.
But Ronnie Cox, of course, is in the first 2 or 3 scenes of the film. His relationship with certainly Taggert is totally different than in the first film, which jars.
Yeah,
and now they came up together. That doesn't work. I know he looks a bit older than he is, but he doesn't really look a contemporary of his. They do look a bit apart in age. And then he's out in none of the film, and having had this life-saving surgery, at the end of the film, he's just sat in a chair smiling in his new office. And
it's very Licence to Kill, isn't it?
It's very where he's like, very like Denner's died, and he's like smiling and going, "See you for fishing in Luton Town 1 at the weekend." You know, it's all like you're meant to be a bit sad at this, and between him finding out that he's been shot and coming into town, he's laughing his ass off at things again and pulling little, and
he seems quite happy.
It deflates all tension out of it for at least a portion of the film. Bogomill should have been critical. But he was critical for the length. He was critical for the length of one phone call.
Yeah, considering like the brutal nature of like how he was shot, and it's basically kind of drive-by. Spoiler alert: a drive-by in broad daylight as well, and kind of like I would say like obviously you have the big shootout at the end because they are gun runners essentially.
Yeah.
But I would say like not that I'm prude or anything out, but I would say the first film, like who was it? Oh, Stephen Berkoff had a. Not that he dies or anything like that, but Berkoff had like a much more violent death.
Yeah.
The Bill kind of got shot. So I kind of
the villains in this are nowhere near as interesting.
No.
Yeah, funnily enough.
You got some really great. You got Bridget Bridget Nielsen, Jürgen Prochnow, definitely kind of like, you know, really big names, kind of known for sort of like villainous roles or roles that are a bit more murky, a bit more layered.
Prochnow was
that was like my main sort of criticism, really. I mean, Stephen Beck, you know, he's a fantastic actor. He's played a variety of different roles on TV and film. Just unfortunately, I did find him a little bit underwhelming there. And then same here as well. You know, you've got these really big names. I mean, Bridget Nielsen, you know, cuts a really impressive figure. You know, whatever she's in, she's just so iconic. And here she really, you know, I think if they were to remake this film today, they could have, you know, recast her, get her back again, or somebody like Tilda Swinton, somebody, you know, very tall, very fair, you know, almost sort of, you know, can cut any figure really.
No, you'd cast that 6'3" one from Game of Thrones.
That's true, actually.
Whatever she's called, I've blanked on her name.
Very tall lady.
Yeah.
But no, it's just one of those things where, you know, you've got these really big names. You've got sort of you know, Dean Stockwell. You've got Gilbert Gottfried as well. Like there's
too many of them.
Yeah, Hugh Hefner obviously makes a cameo role because he's very busy running the Playboy Bunnies. Chris Rock obviously would go on to be a big star, but you've kind of got these really big names, and you do very little with them. I mean, Jürgen Prochnow's scenes, I mean, they are kind of, there's a lot of chiaroscuro kind of lighting as well, lots of kind of light and shadow to show that he is a nefarious character. But it's just like you've got these really big names, immense talent, and you just don't do very.
They're not all massive, but there's a lot of them. In that, when I think of the bad guy of this film, from now on, my brain is going to go to the chief of police, Lutz.
Well, exactly. Yeah, he's probably
he's more of an antagonist to them than the rest of them.
Well, he is,
Prochnow,
and in the end, he gets fired himself. So
Prochnow feels like he's in a couple of scenes. He doesn't feel like he's in much. Paul Guilfoyle, who we've seen in loads of things, is hardly in it, and so nobody gets a real hand of Prochnow. Actually, he voiced the German language version of Rocky and Rocky 2. Mm-hmm. And he also did Sly in Creed 2 as well, after the guy who did Stallone's.
Okay.
He basically is Stallone's German voice.
I didn't know that.
I've heard.
Fun fact, folks.
And he was in Das Boot as well.
He was kind of, especially to German audiences, also to English audiences as well. He's known for Das Boot for sure.
Yeah, right.
I've heard now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure it's a German one, but I'm sure like the same person who does Sly is the same one who does Arnold Schwarzenegger.
He did do Arnold Schwarzenegger before that, yes. Whether that overlaps or he still does it, I don't know, because I didn't look into it that closely. But yeah, I mean, I'm just going to roll into my first thoughts here. I feel this is so disjointed. Now, for about half of the film, because I remember being underwhelmed by it, I thought it was working as a slightly inferior remake of the first film, where he ends up blagging his way into a property to stay in. Very much a rerun of how it was done in the first film. The opening crime is a jazzed up version of the same thing, him like being caught in the middle of something with bad guys. The circumstance, even about 24 minutes in, he's driving down the main road in Beverly Hills looking around at people, very like the first film. You've got at least a police figure that he's running foul of. He's doing, I think, ridiculous schemes around his boss in this one. It's gone way over the top. But I feel like there's reshoots in this. I feel like they've made a straight action film and then they've gone, shit, this isn't funny. Let's have a scene where Axel turns up here and Eddie just fucking riffs. And the riffs are nowhere near as good, by and large. It's like, I remember when I showed my wife Bowfinger, and she quite liked the film, but a bit like when my mother saw it, she was a bit like, he's just so shouty. Well, that was the point. The character's meant to be like that in that film. But when it works, it's brilliant. It's like a wonderful flight of fancy. And when it doesn't work, it's a guy shouting and rolling his eyes Stevie Wonder style. And I can feel that in this film. And I think long before the end, I was kind of done with it. It wasn't funny enough. The interest in the plot was fading. I didn't care about the last shootout, although I must say, even though I liked the first film, I don't really care about the shootout at the end of that film either. The relationship between the three main guys in Beverly Hills, i.e. Bogomill and the two cops, isn't quite the same. That's really odd. Bogomill has just chilled out immensely. They do at least cover the fact that, because I was a little bit like, Axel goes out there as an old friend and is friendly with like Bogomill's daughter and stuff like that. Actually, if you look careful on their desks, there's like pictures of them all fishing together. So he's clearly been out on like vacations with them in the interim. So he's become close to them after Bogomill saved his job. And Bogomill has learned, probably through his exposure to Axel, to like loosen up a bit. So Taggert calls him by his first name, Andy, I think he calls him, which is unusual and not what you would have had in the first film. The set's completely changed as well. It doesn't look like the offices in the first film. It suddenly looks like it's moved to a different cinema.
It looks like Blade Runner. Looks like
it's suddenly moved to a different cinematic universe. You know what I mean? It's like they've all relocated. It's like all the sets have burnt down and they've rebuilt them from memory. It's a little bit disjointed. I feel this reshoot. I do feel a less than motivated Eddie Murphy, though he's very funny in places. Some scenes really work, and we'll get to it, I'm sure. But so many of them feel like a slightly inferior retread. Like the bit with the vitamins, the only way that would have been less of a retread is if he turned up and claimed to have herpes simplex 11 instead of 10, you know what I mean? So none of it quite works, and I think as a final point, you can see them trying to recreate that little snippy dialogue between Billy and John Taggert, and it just doesn't work as well. Billy's an asshole to him. This guy's marriage has just broken up, and he's being a bit of a dick, and all the silly gunplay in the character, it's Judge Reinhold's ego going to his head as well. So it's not as bad as I remember, but it's overstuffed. I mean, the film's a bit longer than this with credits, but the credits start to roll. It's something like an hour and 39 minutes, and it feels a lot longer than that. So it's an inferior retread, but it's not completely without merit. But you can see them sort of making it up on the fly, and they don't have the excuse this week. I think that's reshoots. I honestly think it is. The first film, they were a shorter time. Eddie Murphy signed on late, as Chris explained in the last episode. And so necessity being the mother of invention, we've got the broad bones of a script, but it's not funny. So we've got this scene here. Can you get the same information across and make it funny? Here they've gone, we've basically shot a film that isn't funny. Let's do a load of reshoots, and you really feel it. So it's not a great film. It's not as bad as I remember. It's somehow dated worse than the first film, and I think things like Hugh Hefner turning up in a celebrity cameo have not dated well, but the filmmakers couldn't have known that. And Axel's even more of a dick than he was last week. Like, you know, his boss was indulging him because he was good, and this week he's just taking the fucking piss out of his entire job in police department. And it's just like, Eddie, you need a couple of flops. Thankfully, we were about to get some flops from him, and his ego got reined in again. What about you guys?
Becca, what was your first sort of like to go with a first watch?
Oh yeah, first time watch. It's difficult because like this film, like at the time when it came out, I think from doing my research and reading it, it was kind of slated rather unfairly a little bit by the critics at the time. But I know, this is kind of one of those series where a lot of people do hold this one as the best of the lot. Obviously, we'll see what happens when the fourth film, if and when it arrives. Bear in mind, I've personally not seen it before. I was just kind of really struck by, obviously, as I say, it's a different creative, not different creative team, but it's a different director, different writers. Well, I'm not really surprised by how it kind of looks and sounds different. But it's not like like we do have a Bond where you've got a prescription. Basically, you've got a checklist of things that you have to achieve by a certain point in the film. But just kind of the look and the feel of it. I think also because I was watching on DVD, so there's a lot of kind of that sort of retro kind of vibes going on. Definitely. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was kind of obviously a bit more of the same. Eddie Murphy kind of shooting his mouth off and just being very outrageous, very sassy. Whereas kind of like in the first film, it's kind of more sort of like fish out of water. You got this kind of cops who try to do everything by the book, and it's very plain the way they do things within, between like Detroit and LA, for example. There's always kind of like sort of like culture clash almost a little bit. Here obviously you don't have that. We spend very little time in Detroit, and most of the time in LA. I haven't seen the third one yet. That's coming soon, so unfortunately I can't really comment. So any listeners, who are fans of the series, please, I don't mean to upset you. I do apologise. But yeah, it was just, I think the thing that struck me most was kind of like the look of it is very like if I thought the last film was very 1980s, this is even more 1980s. Oh my god, in terms of like the fashion choice and the music and the sort of the look of the film for sure. It was kind of a lot of darker film, as you say, like the villains were kind of more multi-layered, and it wasn't as cut and dry as we've seen with like maybe with the last film, or even with previous kind of action 80s 90s action movies that we've reviewed on the series. It was a lot more kind of, as I say, like the villains kind of multi-layered. It wasn't quite clear. It's one of these things, like organised crime is very often, there's lots of different layers to it. Certainly within, having worked myself in financial services, we obviously did a lot of training around like money laundering, stuff like that. That is also very, very complex, very, very multi-layered for obvious reasons. And I think that was kind of, prevalent to kind of the sort of that was going on at the time as well. That was like the sort of big concern, sort of like drugs, guns, things like that, especially in America as well. Just really unfortunate. But yeah, kind of what sort of for me, it's kind of, I can see why perhaps it was slated by critics at the time, but then I can also see why people really sort of really enjoyed it and would rate this film quite highly. Personally, for me, I would probably say like 3 out of 5. I mean, Eddie Murphy's fantastic. He's absolutely on fire. It's quite funny. Judge Reinhold as well. And it's quite great when he kind of gets a chance to say, hold on a minute, listen to us. We actually solved the crime. Then I would say for all the kind of the murkiness of the villains, that I would say that people, the actors like Brigitte Nielsen, Jürgen Prochnow, are very, very underused. I think my favourite scene probably would be the bit between Gilbert Gottfried and Axel. And apparently that was mostly improvised. That was genius, absolutely genius. The pair of them were actually 100% on fire, and I laughed quite loudly.
The first time seeing Gilbert Gottfried was watching this film. So when he was like casting Aladdin, I was like, oh my god, that's that guy in that scene from Beverly Hills Cop II.
The parrot. Yeah. If you're of a certain age, listeners, if you're like us and you grew up in the 90s, then chances are your first exposure to him may have been through playing the parrot in Disney's Aladdin, which is, I'm sure that's a role that he sort of naturally gravitated to, because he's quite,
What else is he well known for?
But he's got
stand
quite
up, really. He's mostly stand up.
He was stand-up comedy, wasn't he, pretty much?
But I can picture him in a lot of things on TV, like just the odd image of him here and there. Like, I feel like I've seen him in a ton of stuff.
Yeah, he's in quite a lot of things, like voice work and that as well. I mean, he passed away recently, didn't he? Bless him.
He's quite memorable, though. I think that's the thing. When he does show up in something, he's quite a distinct kind of character in himself. It's like,
you can hear him. You can see him.
Godfrey.
That is literally what he sounds like, Chris.
I am here.
That's literally what he sounds
How
like.
you doing?
That's pretty much it, definitely.
I can't see you. I'm squinting too much. He's kind of like.
He has done a lot of animation. I'm just looking. He's done a lot of animation.
Yeah, so many voices.
Yeah, a lot of Disney.
Yeah, a lot of Disney, obviously.
As well, so.
He has a contract for Disney for sure. But yeah, I think if you're like myself and grew up in the 90s, and your first exposure probably would be as Iago the Parrot in Disney.
Put it this way, I know him really well. I've seen this film for the second time today, and yet I've got all these sort of vague images in my head of him. So I must have seen him in a load of stuff, and yet I'm looking through his filmography here, and the vast majority of stuff I've seen is animated. So where the hell do I know him from?
You hear him from all these kind of things. It's just one of those things, and I think he's probably kind of known more for his
He was an SNL alumni, but only for one season, I think.
Yeah.
But there you go. I mean, I've seen A Million Times Ways to Die in the West. I've seen quite a few of these things, but anyway, doesn't matter.
He's in Ninja Turtles, how about that? I enjoyed the film. For me, it's very much more of the same. I just kind of feel like it suffers the same. For me, it kind of suffers the same problems as the last film, where you've got these fantastic actors, really underused. But for me, the high points really obviously Tony Scott directing. It's kind of a lot sort of darker film, a lot more stylistic film, very 1980s in terms of the fashion and the music. Oh my god, I can't get over it. But I still prefer the first film, definitely. But Eddie Murphy is absolutely on fire. It's probably, there are moments that are downright stupid, but there are moments where the script is absolutely on point. It's probably one of the smarter scripts in terms of like the whole script. Well, I haven't seen the third film yet, but the two that I've seen so far, that's probably the smartest of the two scripts, definitely. So I'm kind of, I'm a little bit mixed really. And I'm sorry for any people out there who think, what's on about? The second's the best of the series. But
I don't know if I've ever met anyone say that. Not that I'm constantly canvassing opinion on the Beverly Hills Cop
this is it.
trilogy,
I'm sure there are people out there, definitely. But it's one of those films. I'm sure, I'll probably come to it in another few years' time. I think, actually, it was okay. But it was a bit of a mixed bag for me. More of the same, but, lots that I still enjoyed.
I mean, this isn't an Aliens thing. Beverly Hills Cop is the only acknowledged classic of the three. That doesn't mean you can like anything. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there. It's often an age thing as well. It's like my favourite Rocky film is Rocky 2. I've never claimed that's the best one. It's just the one I saw first, and it got me.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's going to be the one. It's kind of like be like Rose and the Specs, isn't it? Be whichever one I saw first. So it's not like the law, like where you must like it.
It's the one that I don't know, just got me. It isn't always the case because my first Bond films aren't my favourites and so on, but it often follows. Yeah. And I don't really know that this film has that. It will have people who saw it at their first date or their first film they saw. It's bound to be somebody's favourite, but I've never heard a serious argument that this is the strongest in the series. I haven't. The first one's the only one that's considered a classic.
No, I'm sure there are. It's just a few people that have chatted to. I said, "Oh yeah, second's really good," and I was sort of like, "Okay,
I can't imagine. I can't imagine if you like the first one that you would hate this, because it's got a lot of similarities. I think the worst you'll think about it is, it's nowhere near as good, but it's still got some of the things you liked about the first film. I mean, the third film, its Rotten Tomatoes score is something like 11% or something. This is about 46, so roughly half of reviewers kind of liked it, but the majority sort of didn't. Chris, what did you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, partly I generally like it. I mean, obviously I prefer the first one, but for me there's always a bit of a nostalgia because I particularly remember watching it where back in the day it was on ITV when you had Saturday night there was a movie on.
Yeah.
It was one of those, and I remember I remember watching it, and funnily enough, this film was like one of the first times where I really noticed because I remember getting a VHS copy.
Right.
An actual one.
I get it. Not like a copied one. You probably had your trousers around your ankles for 5 minutes before you realised you weren't watching the Red Shoe Diaries because it is Tony Scott. Sorry.
No, but it was like I was like, but Dad was like, I've got a copy of this somewhere. Like, okay. It was some random. It wasn't like a something you'd buy in the shop. It still had like the time code thing at the bottom. But it was like, oh my god, like they really do cut it for TV, don't they?
Yeah. Because
like it's just certain little things like like extra bit of like gunshot here and there or like little things. So
we'll have a lot to talk about when we get to Die Hard with that, because Die Hard was butchered, wasn't it? And we did talk about it quite a bit with RoboCop. There are just films you go, make the weapon the same. It was just like, yeah, okay, you've kind of left it somewhat enjoyable, but you have fucked this up, really.
It tends not to happen too much, but I don't know whether that's because TV's not on. We tend not to watch too much on TV.
It's not done as much now.
Mind you, the BBFC's kind of like lightened up a bit as well.
Yeah.
Because even like with things like Lethal Weapon and things like that, like the British cuts would be different over here to the American cut. Anyway, so that's that. So yeah, so there's also a bit of nostalgia for me when it comes to this.
Yeah.
For me, it is a light retread of the first, but obviously with it typically being a sequel, it's bigger budget, more money, lots more flash, bigger action scenes.
Yeah.
You with Tony Scott, it's gonna have like basically it's like an action film, but as a comedy. Looking through
which was never his strength.
No, and the bonus material, going like watching it, hear Tony Scott, which I mean, you could listen to Tony Scott and you could say that's Ridley Scott, you wouldn't know because they sounded identical.
Oh, what? Sorry, is that the commentary you're talking about?
No, just not the commentary, but just like the making of kind of thing.
So, I mean, I can tell them apart to look at. Are you saying their voices are very similar?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
I've heard Tony Scott interviewed, but I mean, the guy's been dead over 10 years, so I've completely forgotten. It's been a long time since I heard that man's voice.
He sounds pretty much exactly like Ridley Scott.
Ridley's voice I can hear in my head all the time because I'm more of a fan of Ridley. I've owned more of his DVDs over the years, and when DVDs and Blu-rays were new and the bonus features, I still watch the odd one now, and certainly if I'm reviewing. But you know, back in the day when you bought a DVD, you always watched all the extras, didn't you?
Mm.
And you always listened to the commentary. And I've and when you think of Blade Runner, you know, the Dangerous Days documentary and things like that. I've just done hours and hours of, and he did like hour-long interviews at the BFI that were put on the Alien quadrilogy and things like that. So I've heard tons of him, but I've probably only heard Tony speak 3 or 4 times. But yeah, so they're similar. The funny thing is when I was exposed to Tony Scott in interviews or whatever, I liked the guy. I'm not a big fan of him as an interviewer, but as a filmmaker. But to give him his due, nice man, sponsored a lot of other careers through the sort of Scott-free production thing, and he also he laid a sort of stake to a career of his own that was wildly successful in its own right and completely different from his brother's. So I've got to give him some respect for that.
Yeah. He obviously died tragically as well.
He jumped off a bridge, and his brother suggested he was fighting cancer, and he jumped off a bridge rather than go where that disease can take you.
But it was really, because one of the things in the Burst Hill, they just said that, like, how much energy he's got, like, on set. Like the cast was saying, like, I was just astounded, like how much energy, like, he sleep for like 4 hours,
right?
And like and John Aston would talk about, like, oh, we were just next the following morning I was like arriving on set, like, after finishing, like, or whatever, getting in early morning, and he sees this, like, guy jogging. It's like Tony Scott. It's like, Jesus crap, has he got the energy?
I suspect it's a mixture of genetics and work rate, because how old's Ridley, and he's still, like, making a lot of films, and he shoots quickly as well.
Ridley, I mean, I've said this before, like, Ridley just seems to sort of always be working, like even at his old age, and he always finishes on time, always in budget, and regardless of what you think of the end product, they always look great. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, he's almost. I mean, he's so script dependent. I think all filmmakers are to a degree, but if you give him a less than good script, he won't even make a decent film out of it. It will be terrible, but it will be like some of the most beautiful cinematography you ever see. And when you see backstage, quite often he is behind the camera himself. And I just think, like, he's just an incredible filmmaker. But it doesn't mean he makes so much that not everything's amazing. It just can't. It can't be. Just for simple reasons. But he's got Napoleon coming later in the year, and apparently that's looking really good. And he's also on pre-production on a sequel to Gladiator.
Yeah, his last couple of films have been decent as well, and I quite like.
What have his last couple been?
The Last Duel wasn't bad. That was quite interesting.
I can't say I liked it, but again, it looked amazing. House of Gucci, I've not seen.
House of Gucci, again, I'd probably say, like, it looks amazing.
Yeah,
it's got questionable, Jared Leto and whatnot. It is your standard, but again, it's an interesting watch.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly if you look at what I would consider great or at least very, very good films, there's been at least one in the last decade, because I would put The Martian in that category. Yeah, certainly with Ridley, I think he's become a lot more patchy in recent years, but I would say The Martian's a great or at least very good film, and that's from the last decade. So he's still got his talent, definitely.
Yeah, I would say, regardless of his body of work recently, he's always still worth watching. There's always something interesting. I mean, even like with The Last Duel.
Yeah.
it's an interesting idea, and they always look great. I mean, like the House of Gucci, while it's very flash, but it's also very good. You know what I mean? So it's it very much feels like what a Gucci film about Gucci ought to be. You know, it's all very like it does feel like so. Yeah, and he does. You know, I would say, you know, his worst like films really are really down to the script. You know, do you know what I mean? Like you'll give Ridley Scott a good script, and he'll shoot the fuck out of it.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
And then he's a fantastic filmmaker, and historically he was very good at picking a script. I think in recent years that's become less reliable, and he's probably the worst of the great directors for overcoming a poor script, if you know what I mean. Because he has made some right garbage, but it looks fantastic. He makes it very well. But I think on Tony, I'm trying to be a bit balanced here because I'm not a fan of his. But he's not a Brett Ratner. He's not a Stephen Sommers. He has something more about him than that. And people like Denzel Washington worked with him again and again and again. And for all I've heard about Eddie Murphy, apparently he got on very well with him. So the irony is, I think he's probably the actor's director of the two of them. And but there is less variation in the look of his films than there are with Ridley's.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could probably sort of sense that he's quite mild-mannered, and given what I've like heard before, obviously he's very hard-working, so mild-mannered.
They both are.
Easy to get on with, and works hard. You're gonna get on a lot, aren't you?
Yeah.
Whatever you do. So
whereas there were certainly early in Ridley's career, there was a lot of people he didn't get on quite so well with. I don't know that that's the case anymore. But they both had great careers, and I just felt like I needed to add that balance before we go into the detail of this film. And I start saying more negative things when it's known I'm not a big fan of his. I respect the career he had, and I certainly don't want to say he was talentless. He was just not to my taste, by and large. And there's a couple of his so-called best films, and I say so-called just because I haven't seen them. I'm not arguing. That I haven't seen. I really like The Hunt for Red October, and people speak very highly of Man on Fire, which I've not seen.
Hunt for Red October wasn't his.
Sorry, Crimson Tide.
Tide, yeah.
I did mean Crimson Tide. Sorry,
oh, yeah.
It's because they're both submarines.
They're quite similar movies.
Yeah, Crimson,
we'll let you off.
Crimson Tide, I liked a lot. I was reading about The Hunt for Red October the other day, so I should know who made that. But there you go. Crimson Tide. I liked a surprising amount because I saw it was him, and I thought this is going to be flashy nonsense, and it was very, very far from that. And as I say, a lot of people speak highly of Man on Fire, but then I've heard people speak highly of films I have seen of his that didn't like his last film was Unstoppable, Chris Pine and Denzel. And I've read people on social media going, he really went out with a bang. I thought that film was garbage. So, but there we go. He had a very, very good career in his own right, but I'm not sure he was the right choice for this. Because he doesn't have a real good comedy ear. There's funny moments in his film. He could do levity. There's a couple of laughs in Top Gun, particularly the bathroom scene and all the rest of it. There's a couple of funny moments in that film. But it's not really his strength. And not only that, you needed someone with a much more neutral shooting style than his, because it glaringly stands out from the first film.
See, I think it could have. I think it would have. I think the problem was, like as you say, I don't think the story, it didn't have the benefit of having like a bare bones kind of like straight up story to follow. Do you know what I mean? It could have. Tony Scott would have like shot it like a Tony Scott movie and have and do all the action stuff, and then like all the stuff in between. You got Eddie Murphy doing what he does best. And that probably would have worked absolutely fine as a sequel. I think what made it kind of fall apart, or maybe not so good as the others, is it's the first one I should say. It's just that the story wasn't quite convoluted. The story is a bit too convoluted. It wasn't quite there. A bit too convenient. A bit of a retread. Those kind of things. Now, before we talk through the film, I will also say it is nice I do think Taggert and Rosewood are good again. They're a good double act. We should have got a solo movie of them too. I will say that.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I think, to be fair, they were the highlight for sure.
It's nice to see the subtle changes in how they were. There is there's a stark contrast how they're all bosom buddies now. They're all bezzers. So like me, if you watch this film first, in its entirety, and you go back to this one, it's a bit of oh my god.
Why are they in the first one? It's suddenly why are they in a smaller, starkly lit set and they don't like each other? Yeah.
But it's so obviously Taggert's gone a little bit. He's the same, but he has a little bit mouthy. So he has before he would keep his mouth shut, but now he's keeping his mouth shut, but have moments of I'll give a sarky comment because I've had enough of this shit kind of thing.
I don't know if it's just the actor or a deliberate choice in sort of makeup or prepping for the role, but he looks a little heavier. I'm not looking to fat shame anyone, but he looks a little heavier again, and he looks a lot tireder. In a couple of years, he just looks quite a bit older to me. Maybe if I ran them one after another, I wouldn't notice, but I noticed when I watched it earlier today that I think he looks like he's hit hard times.
Yeah.
Compared to the first film, and Rosewood's having a great life. He's found his confidence.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So he's gone a lot bit more a little bit more out there. But it kind of makes sense that after getting involved with the shootouts, things like that, and the first one, he's kind of gone yeah, let's go for it. So but he still has that naive kind of sensibility where he's there with the bazooka and just oh, okay, so how do I operate this thing? All that sort of stuff worked really well, I thought, and the main problem is also the villains this time around. Now Bridget Nielsen, I think is fine. I think she's very striking looking, and she does what she is supposed to do for this film. The Jordan Prognell just was not given enough. You barely notice him, and one of the things I did pick up on after this viewing was when Axel does his whole I'm going to embarrass the main villain in a public setting kind of thing, and he's oh, I've not begun to annoy you yet. That's just a good halfway through the film, and it's the first time they've actually met face to face, and it's there's no establishment of
No, he met Bridget, and he met the manager of the gun club, who's basically a cover for them.
Yeah. And
kind of pissed them off, and then behind the scenes, one step removed, that guy says to kill him, and it's no, you've got to get them face to face earlier.
Yeah, it kind of made I mean, thinking about it now, surely it was the guy Ross Fielding, wasn't it? We never see him again. It's why wasn't that just Judge and Pinch now? Just be just pissing him off there and then, and be that's your scene where he goes to he busts his way through into what's his name in the first film?
The country club?
Yeah, not the country club, but in the first time he meets the villain.
He goes into Victor Maitland's offices.
Yeah, someone. Yeah, exactly. That should be Victor Maitland introduction scene when he just walks in there and just. It's
just adding unnecessary layers.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, but his scene there is fine, where he's he's on TV, you're gonna kill him, kind of thing. But
does CCTV normally come with sound?
It doesn't help that the way Tony Scott is, it's all done with a lot of shadows and shade. So half the time you can't really see him. Do you know what I mean? You because if you're not really paying that much attention, you couldn't really. You
pick up a vague shape of head, don't you, and hairstyle. Yeah, I mean, it's not that you can't see him.
Right
it's
down
that
to how he gets killed. He's gets shot in a car.
Victor Maitland. Not only does the actor have a very distinctive face, but even a couple of things like that, the shape of the head, the hairline, and also he's got that sort of is it a birthmark, a mole? What would we call it in the middle of his head? It's not a mole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so once you see him, particularly in decent light, he's burnt on your memory. And this the way this is shot, it doesn't have that. Absolutely. But there you go. So you end up with Bridget Nielsen as the most memorable of any of them, really. Outside of, and like I say, when I think of this film, and you think antagonist, I think of the police chief.
I mean, yeah, he is a great arsehole, though, isn't he?
He's brilliant. He's really good.
I haven't seen him much else.
It could almost be overdone, but I didn't think it. It is overdone. Who behaves like that? But I have had only twice. I've been quite lucky through most of my career, but I can think of a couple of people I've worked with that were just unbearable. I can think of a few more that were bordering on unbearable, but I managed. But there were one or two that it was like, it genuinely got me blood pressure up to go into work. One of them I went sick after for a while. Long time ago now. But these people do exist where they're just inexplicably abusive and they think they're doing a good job. So whilst it might be a bit overblown in this film because it has to be
and
shorthand,
they take credit for everything.
It's not as far-fetched as you might think. This guy, it was an actor called Alan Garfield. He's passed away now. He died of COVID. He died in the early stages of COVID. But he'd been sick since the late 90s. Apparently he's in The Ninth Gate, which I can't even remember if I've seen. It's a Polanski film. And he'd had a stroke. And they used him with his face all sort of paralysed in it. And then he was a care resident for the last sort of 15, 16 years of his life. But in terms of what I've seen him in, he was in Bananas, the Woody Allen film. He was in The Candidate, which is a Robert Redford film. I'm just focusing on films I've seen. He was in the Francis Ford Coppola film The Conversation. He was in Nashville, the Robert Altman film. You've seen him in stuff, put it that way. Let me see if there's anything else. The Cotton Club, also Coppola. What else? Dick Tracy. That's it for the high profile stuff, I think. So yeah. Oh, and he was in an episode of The West Wing as well. So yeah, you've seen this guy before, but I think if I see him again, I will associate him with this. He's only in his late 40s at this point, but what an arsehole. But they do exist. They come in and they've got, particularly in that sort of, not quite top level of management, they're accountable to somebody, and they just pissed with whatever power they've got. He's not that far-fetched. But yeah, he's who I think of, which is a shame because we should be thinking of the Dent character, I think.
Yeah, and I just don't think he's given well, I mean that's the point. I mean, does he have a character?
No, so that doesn't help with this story. Who is it we're hanging on to? Is it him?
He's probably, Jordan Patchell probably is doing something, but it just doesn't come out in the film. Do you know what I mean?
No, it's not his fault. But the problem is, the first film, you've got a laser focus on Victor Maitland. The people that are getting in his way in the police department, like Bogomill at that stage, are not badly intentioned. They're just trying to do their jobs, what they consider properly. And you think of it, and it's Bond villain and henchman, because you've got the Jonathan Banks actor playing whatever his character's called, Zach, I think. This film doesn't have it because is it Bridget Nielsen? In my memory, it was because I remembered the shooting at the start of the film. Is it Jurgen Prochnow? Or is it meant to be, because the guy above it all is the Bald Guilfoyle, the Tom Tompolis character? Completely wasted actor because he's been in loads of stuff and he's really, really good, this guy. I'm trying to think what I know him best from. And again, I'm having a look. He's this sort of person who turns up in everything. He was in Three Men and a Baby, Wall Street, True Colours, Hoffa.
I think that's probably like my main complaint with the film, but it's very, very busy. It's quite also there's a huge cast list, and we just don't spend enough time with these people. I think that's probably like my main issue.
Primary Colours he was in, I remember that. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Becca. So let's go into the film sequentially. I struggled to get a handle on the film as it started because Axel was doing something and he was already annoying me, and I just think it turns out he's undercover as this kind of character, but the instant preening made me think, right, Eddie Murphy's ego's out of control. Maybe that's unfair?
Well, it's a bit more of a, like, his stand-up persona, isn't it? The kind of, like, you know, the one that wears, like, tight leather suits and sort of, like...
Yeah.
And what's on stage with, like a rock star. You know, it's a little bit like that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
You know.
I'd say so. Yeah, okay. So, I don't really want to say much about this. We've got Axel driving around in a Ferrari wearing what's clearly an expensive suit, expensive tie pin, shades, all that kind of stuff. It's the first film again. The difference is he's taking the piss all the more. In the first film, it was an undisclosed mission that caused a load of destruction his boss would have to deal with. In this one, you know, a policeman renting a Ferrari undercover, which is going to get trashed before the film's out. Not so sure about this. It's less interesting. What's more interesting is what's happening in Beverly Hills, which... Do we see the robbery first, or do we see...
Yes, it opens with the robbery. And then it opens... Then as we go straight to the title sequence, which is Axel driving around in his Ferrari, and then he goes to, like, a diner to meet with... is it Vern? Vinny? No, Vinny.
Yeah, Vinny is the Robert Pastorelli character. Like I say, I don't know if Americans would know him the same way, because I don't know how big Cracker was. It was a thing here that we knew about because it was remaking one of our, like, defining shows of the 90s. Cracker was massive. Partly because of its quality, partly because of its uniqueness. We hadn't had criminal psychologists in sort of law enforcement programs at that stage. But not only that, Robbie Coltrane was a comedy actor. I'm trying to think. Can you think of another example like that, Chris, where suddenly like somebody you know purely for comedy does like an absolutely straight role? I suppose Robin Williams, maybe.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when you watch Robin Williams in like Good Will Hunting, and you suddenly go, shit, he's really good at that.
Yeah, like Jim Carrey's probably the other one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Where somebody known for one thing.
But on TV though, I think that was probably a big shock as well. Obviously, he's kind of known, over here certainly primarily on TV as well. But obviously, like films are kind of, they can obviously Robin Williams and Jim Carrey are good examples like on the screen as well. But I think also at the same time, it was quite shocking. Well, not shocking, but quite surprising for that to happen like on the small screen as well. So I think that's part of why it had an impact as well.
It was really like gritty as well.
It was really high quality, and it was pushing the envelope. They would talk about sort of incestual sexual assaults and things like that in families because he was trying to get
kind of to Prime Suspects as well.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things like how those sort of crime, perhaps you wouldn't have seen maybe in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and that sort of thing, how they were portrayed. And they weren't really kind of afraid to stray away from the gory details, really.
Chris will know more about this. I mean, because I was living in Liverpool at the same time, and they had, like, Manchester and Liverpool are 35 miles apart, roughly. And Chris obviously knows Manchester better, but he lives within, driving distance of both of them. And Manchester was changing in the 90s, and certainly they had a comeback show in 2006, and the city was just transformed. So it documents all that as well, but it's just sheerly its quality. It got brilliant casting in it. His boss was originally played by the Ninth Doctor. What's his name? Christopher Eccleston. Sorry, yeah. So most people listening to this tonight will know Christopher Eccleston from something, whether it's Doctor Who or like Shallow Grave or something else. But he
went on to feature Renard from The World Is Not Enough. As like this crazy bomber.
That's the most iconic episode. This is a guy traumatised by Hillsborough. I'll let you Wikipedia or Google the Hillsborough disaster if you're not from this country. And he played a Liverpudlian who was like trying to get revenge on public figures after that because like I think it killed his granddad or something like that. And it's brilliant. I mean, Robert Carlyle, whilst he can't open a Hollywood film or something, is a bona fide like film star. And he got his sort of biggest break in that film, playing an absolute head case. And it was just a fantastic TV show. Anyway,
check it out.
Completely irrelevant to Beverly Hills Cop 2, though.
we are known for going off on a tangent, and our epic tangent this week is check out Prime Suspect, check out Cracker, any of these groundbreaking, British crime TV shows from
Cracker's
the early
one of
90s.
the very best. One of the very best we produced. But and it will look a bit dated now, but it's very, very good. And it's from a part of the country I like as well. But anyway, I mean, I don't live up that way anymore, but I've always loved the northwest of England. But
I think that without it, we wouldn't have a lot of the regional sort of series that we have now. Definitely,
I think that's
it
probably true. Although we're overlooking the massive importance of Spender.
Well, apart from that, but it's one of those sort of series to kind of move it outside of London or outside of like the well-known cities and things like that. So
it isn't a shock now when they set them regionally yet.
Well, it's not.
But what I was going to say is
anyway, sorry.
The early part of this film cross-cuts each other, and I'm just wondering. I'm not worried about time, but because there's a few things I'm not sure about, and a few things I want to put together. Bear in mind, I saw it once today. I didn't get to see it yesterday when I was planning to, so I watched it once. It was in plenty of time for tonight, but with any single viewing of a film, you'll miss a detail. So we've got this Axel bit. I don't think that's important. I think that just explains why he's driving a Ferrari and why he's pissing off his boss, but also he's making excuses of leave me to it and I'll come back with a result, which allows him to fly under the radar for most of the events of the film. But we've also got this robbery. We've also got Bogomill running through what looks like a quarry, and there's something about his shoes being covered with that later. And I don't understand the reference. I missed that detail. What is the point of him running through a quarry? Is it just them finding his route, the bad guys, because of the alphabet, and he's B for Bogomill, A was this jeweller's? Can somebody explain this to me?
It is said. Axel just said, I think he was like tipped off about something. So I think the implication there is he actually went there jogging to kind of like look to see what was, to kind of, to have a look, but obviously he was spotted.
And this is an oil field owned by the bad guy, isn't it? And I don't think we picked that up till the end, and I'm only just seeing in my head oil equipment. So yes, it isn't it's not like a ceramics quarry or something, it's an oil field.
To skip what happened, I mean, Axel does say, I think he was like tipped off about something, and then you say he must have had been tipped off about, and it isn't really explained. He's just like assumption, like he was tipped off. Because I've got questions.
I can imagine we'll be crisscrossing the first 4 or 5 scenes of the film.
Because you look at the thing, and he's like, while he's talking to Axel in a second, he is like he's got like a cutout of the club, so he's kind of like
he's onto something. Do we mean the strip club?
Yeah,
I'll have something to say about the strip club when we get there, because I think it's quite hilarious the way it's shot, but we'll come to that. Okay, so the next question I've got is, they've obviously got this new boss, the police in Beverly Hills. This is the main 3 from the first film there are all still working together, and their new boss over the top of them, this Lutz character, is just bullying them, and apparently an awful lot of them have quit. And
they've all been sacked or something because of
it's like he's come in with his own ideas on standards, and it's get with the program or go. Very like the final season of NYPD Blue, for anyone who's seen that with Bale. But I don't understand why did Billy call the FBI? What does that have to do with Bogomill's hunch, if anything, and why does that piss off Lutz so badly?
So it doesn't do anything in regards to
this is sorry before you answer that, this is in response to the burglary, isn't it?
Yes,
robbery. So we need to explain that in a minute, but just but dealing with my questions, that's details I missed today.
Yeah, so this is directly about the burglary. So like Rosewood sort of mentions, I know a guy in the like I know a guy, kind of thing. It might help us out, and then it turns out that he actually spoke to someone from the FBI and got found out, essentially. And it's like, well, you're not supposed to be working on this. I've not assigned you to this. So this is like the big meeting So he's Rosewood
first
basically
off, he's not assigned to it anyway, so he shouldn't be calling anyone in. And secondly, Lutz is territorial, so he's basically saying you've gone outside our jurisdiction.
Yeah, essentially, so you basically acted like behind your thing.
Does this have any relation to Bogomill's knowledge?
So Bogomill said, like, look, did you tell him to do this? And he's like, Bogomill said, well, no, but, and he's like, well, that's fine. It's because he was gonna fire Rosewood, and then Bogomill stands up for him.
Yeah.
Basically saying
hunches. He talks about policing
like,
being hunches.
Come on, this is like basic. Look, come on, he just has to bound. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, it's not. Don't be ridiculous. Look.
I'm just confused by the whole thing. Not because it's inherently difficult, but I don't think. I'm sure if I watched it again, I'd pick it all up. But I think on one viewing, I don't get what this has got to do with Bogomill running through a oil field, if anything.
It's but it's a separate thing.
Okay.
So Bogomill's onto his own thing.
Right.
Like he's like, okay, So I'm not quite sure whether he's figured out whether it's part of the alphabet robberies yet, but he's onto something.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure, but yeah. So this is.
It's not the cleanest plotting, is it?
No. Well, but bear in mind this is all kind of like we've not meant to know what's going on yet with regards to Bogomill and the oil field, whatever.
Fine.
So all we know at this point is first alphabet robbery. Rosewood contacted someone.
It's an A with a load
FBI.
of numbers on it. They leave an envelope.
Yeah.
That has a letter of the alphabet on the top, and when you open it out, it just seems to have a load of numbers inside. And I'm not sure if that's ever explained.
Yeah. So Rosewood tries to contact the FBI, see if they could give any information. This is not something that they were supposed to be doing because they're not assigned to the case.
Yeah.
And Lutz was going to fire Rosewood, and then basically Bogomill stuck up for him.
So he gets reassigned anyway.
I'm standing behind him, and he's like, okay, fine, well, I'll fire you then.
Right.
Essentially, or I'll suspend you.
Yeah, he wants to fire him, but he says there's due process, and he says we're required to give you 2 days right of reply, basically. So you got 2 days to figure out what you're going to say. But then on the way home, he's followed by, well, if anyone doesn't know this is Bridget Nielsen, given you already saw her at the robbery, you've never seen a film, because it's clearly Bridget Nielsen in a brown wig, which he has the presence of mind to pull off her as he's shot, because later it's reported that eyewitnesses saw a very tall, statuesque blonde, which Axel is able to link when he meets her at the gun club.
Yeah.
So he's shot twice, once by a passing guy, and once, that's part of it, and once by her. And I really do believe they should have. Now, Eddie Murphy's back in his own office, detective, even though he's about 24, and he is watching a very crap picture quality TV report that News from LA.
Yeah.
Bogomill gunned down, which I always read as killed, to be honest, but okay. When Jenny calls him, I don't think we know. Is it Jenny? I think it was Lisa in the first film, wasn't it, or something like that. But whatever. She calls him. They're clearly old friends. If you look very carefully, they've got these photos of vacations, but it's shorthand. It's like they haven't thought about it. They haven't thought about how they're good enough friends. Right, let's get a photo of them all together quickly. Or let's early Photoshop, whatever version of photo doctoring they had then. But she tells him immediately that she's upset, but he's out of danger. And I think that's a misstep by the film. I think you need to keep Bogomill in danger for longer. The fact he's out of danger immediately means they don't feel the same tension, and it does feel transparently like we haven't got Ronnie Cox.
It was kind of now speaking to somebody who works along these kind of things or has some experience, to say that like I kind of got the impression by what it's saying, like there is something hanging in the air with like, well, he has just been shot. So I got the sense that the emergency operation went well,
right?
But that doesn't mean So to my ears that means like, well, the operation was success. He's stable in quotation marks, but then he has been shot twice. So
what you needed to do is you either needed to keep him in danger longer, or you needed some sense that he's still in some danger because he knows something. So, you know, guards at the hospital, that kind of shit.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help.
Bit like Nordberg had in the Naked Gun.
Yeah, it doesn't help that we don't see him after that because of like the
because they don't have him.
The shooting. Yeah, so
it's such a shame. And when we next see him, he's like
so
I say, he looks perfectly well and really happy.
Even if it was just like a couple of scenes interjecting where they come and visit the hospital and he looks like crap, or they explain like, there's, yeah. He's still fighting for his life. We can kind of see it, or this kind of thing.
How big a deal it is, I don't know. But when you're not committing to any sense of peril around him, you are basically telling us that this is just a device to shoot around Ronnie Cox's absence.
But to your argument though, there is like later on where he's like speaking with Jenny. He's like, oh, how's your by the way, he's like an after. Oh, how's your dad doing? Oh, he's doing just great. He's up around it now. It's like, oh, great, oh, fantastic.
Yeah. He's just conspired against Murphy. He's on the set of RoboCop as we speak. I just think it's too there are things in this film that are transparently the circumstances they found themselves in, because none of them are to the film's benefit. They don't have Bogomill, or they don't have the actor, sorry, so they've got limited opportunities to show him in any kind of danger, and because the film doesn't commit to this sense of peril around him, it feels totally like, well, the film's only unfolding this way because we don't have Ronnie Cox. But that's fine. So Axel now says to Paul Reiser's character, who was in the first film, a bit forgettable other than we all know him from Mad About You and Aliens and a few other things. But if you didn't know the actor, I think you'd probably have forgotten the character. But he's one of Axel's fellow detectives in Detroit, likes to sit around reading porn mags and things like that. He's a bit of an asshole, and he's told to drive around to the Ferrari for a few days just so it looks like Axel's still in town. And
I kind of forgot that he was in this film.
Well, the whole riffing on him saying "scooch down behind the wheel so you can see it's not me." That looks like a riff that was added at the last minute and not in any way scripted, because it's not funny. Goes on for 2 or 3 minutes and it's not funny. But we stole the deal with the Robert Pastorelli and all the rest of it. The guy from the first film sees him, so he has to do some fast talking again. Basically accuses him of being a cop, and then he flies out to LA. So we're about 20. I deliberately looked, but I didn't have the presence of mind to go back to the first film, because I was largely of the opinion that we're watching a remake effectively. I did mean to go back and see where in the first film he's driving down the street in Beverly Hills, but I didn't do that. But for reference, it's 24 minutes in here. So we've wasted a third of the film's running time, or roughly a little bit less than that, maybe a quarter, on not very much, to be honest with you, although it set the film up. We get a little bit of him driving down the sort of street in the same way as the first film. Again, all the same things, not committed to the same degree. The only thing I will say, though, is that his friend Billy in the first film, we never committed to any grief around that, to be honest. But the version of the sitting on top of the world in the Beverly Palm Hotel is him basically stealing a house. What do we think of this scene? Because from my point of view, it was transparently a retread, which made it less impactful, but it wasn't bad.
I mean, well, for me, it was this is like the first time I saw the films, like a Beverly Hills Cop film.
So it's not a retread to you.
No, so first impression is it's just like, he just blacked himself a house, and it's just one of those things. I mean, part of me thinks I'm not sure it would work as well. I mean, that's probably the believable aspect of it. I don't quite think you can just sort of go.
You flash a badge for a split second. At some point, somebody say, "Can I have a proper look at that badge, please?" What is it? I mean, the other thing is they're builders. When he says,
the guy's going to go, "Hang on, let me call my mate right here."
Yeah, I need to call my office. But the second thing that occurred to me is, in the first film, he says something like, "I'm with US Customs" or whatever. I'm not sure he does say that, but it's something like that. He says something that we all know exists. In this one, he says, "I'm with the Beverly Hills Building Authority." Let's say. I can't remember because I saw it once earlier today. But right, you know, when you're riffing like that, you're leaving yourself quite open to the foreman going, "There's no such organisation," or "It's not called that, it's called this," or "I actually know their inspector from this area, and that's not how it works." And you never get "give me the keys and fuck off." You know what I mean? None of this is in any way plausible, in the same way that the Beverly Palm Hotel sequence worked because he was shouting in front of very important wealthy people, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a hotel goes, "We have whatever you want because we need you to shut up in this lobby."
Yeah,
it doesn't work as well here.
I think the main selling point, or that makes it believable, is like the idea that builders would like sort of jump at a chance to have a week off work.
Yeah, and he sees the plans immediately, and he's reasonably, bits of it work, bits of it don't. Overall, it's funny. I think if you saw this film first, you'd really like it. If you've seen the second film first, you'll still like it because it will remind you of something you liked in the first film, but you'll also realise it as a very weak retread. And then we go into a load of plot things. He gets the daughter to Jan, not Jenny, to find out about this dense financial dealings, but this is after he goes to this club. He goes to a gun club. Have I missed out anything here?
So he goes to the police station first, doesn't he?
Right. Okay.
So they have like that's where he first meets Lutz, and he pretends to be a psychic. But really, what they're looking at the gun shells found at the scene.
That's right, and Axel has a lot more street knowledge than these guys. He can immediately say, well, it's used in these type of guns in these circumstances. They're expensive.
They don't make these anymore.
They don't make them. They're expensive, and they're difficult to get hold of. So, in other words, these people knew what they wanted and had the money to get it.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with serious people. That's a good scene. I think that's the one thing the film does slightly better than the first film. It sells you. The first film sells you Axel has an attitude that these guys could do with having some of because they're too stiff and by the book. The second film sells that he has a street level experience that allows him to have some skills they don't have.
Yeah.
And I think it does that very well.
So he goes like, where do you go? So the actor asks, well, where do we go now? It's like, well, this is your town. Who's the guy to ask to about bullets, like gunshot? So they put to Ross Fielding. He's a top guy in.
I recognise the Ross Fielding actor.
Yeah.
They're again completely wasted. Tom Bauer, still alive. He's 85 now. I'm trying to see what do I know him from.
He was in Die Hard 2. So he was the janitor guy, Marvin.
Yep. Okay. Definitely that. And we'll do Die Hard one day. We couldn't not because it's a favourite of Chris's. I feel a bit awkward about Die Hard at the moment because of Bruce's state of health. I do wonder if it's almost waiting for... you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Do we wait for it to be a tribute thing? I don't know. But we'll do Die Hard one day. He was in the Hills Have Eyes remake. He was in El Camino, the Breaking Bad film. Nixon, the Anthony Hopkins film about Richard Nixon, which is a very, very good film, actually. Yeah, okay, I've seen him in plenty, and he's done a fair bit of TV as well, including the X-Files, Murder, She Wrote, which everyone's done Murder, She Wrote. I'm sure I've been in episodes of that. I'm sure if I watch enough episodes, we all turn up somewhere. You know, we walk in as, do you expect us to talk? And the audience thinks we're like Fonzie and cheers, and we're like, eh, that sort of thing. Okay, so where do we go after this? I quite like this sequence. Again, it's one of the things when I close my eyes and picture the film, I picture this sequence. Firstly, because I think it's in a lot of the trailers, but secondly, this is another Tony Scott type sequence. Lots of close-in shots and very dark colour palette. But not dark in a noir sense, dark in an overly moody sense. I don't know how to describe it. I think he's a bit of a dick here, but that's kind of his stock in trade. He just goes in to put the shits up people. This is... what does he do here?
He pretends he's got like really explosive, like kind of like shells.
Yeah, he's bought some vitamins, hasn't he?
Yeah,
Rosewood.
vitamins.
It's vitamins. So he takes them in, and it's a retread of the herpes simplex 10 scene from the previous film. he's going to make an embarrassment. He splashes his face to make it look like he's been sweating with fear, and he makes this big thing about what he's got as explosive and radioactive and whatever else. So they send him down the hallway to basically a shooting range, and they're all there with these sort of laser guided dummies, really just shooting at film of people, and he just basically makes a nuisance of himself. Goes on about the shell, he got it as a present from Charles Bronson. Again, all feels like no one has sat and written this. This feels like making some shit up on the spot. Doesn't always work. Not everything you're going to say. It's a bit like, stand-up. A lot of it you probably developed riffing, but then you workshop it and you try it with test audiences, and some of it gets dropped. But if you're doing it on the first take, it's not all going to work.
So,
but he gets all their hackles up.
Yeah, so he walks in, so he's like, he's initially going in for information about the bullet, but obviously behind the scenes they're like, right, why is he showing? Why is this guy showing?
Firstly,
up
that bullet
bullets,
he's shown me, the manager's like, the bullet. There's what is it? So there's the gun rage guy, the armourer. That's Ross. He made the bullet, or the bullet comes from there. Whether he physically makes them or sources them, I can't remember. But they're his bullets, and he recognises them. And they're like, "You didn't tell him that, did you?" And he said, "No." And then you've got Dean Stockwell's character, who's the manager, and then you've got the other guy, Dent, is the owner, and above him. And he's in league with an Eastern arms dealer who's a complete waste of a brilliant actor. So
doesn't have a speaking line at all.
Doesn't have a speaking line, and you've seen him in so many things, folks. If you're not watching along with us, look up the guy who plays this character. The character's name is, let me look at it again, Nikos Thermopoulos, Paul Guilfoyle. You have seen him in things. You've seen him in a lot of things. Although he has a passing resemblance to other actors as well. He's got a passing resemblance to I'm Buck and I Like to Fuck from Kill Bill 1.
It does look a little bit like that.
It
Yeah,
does.
but it's confusing. Like, why does he not have a line? Literally, it's just. But
I don't know.
That's what I
Rewrites,
found like
maybe?
most frustrating about this movie. Is like you got really sort of legendary people.
Very
you give them
good
nothing to do.
actors.
It's just like,
Yeah.
that's
agree.
gonna be. I'm just gonna hit you over the head with a hammer. So,
Well,
No,
it's,
it's-
it makes you think maybe there may be some deleted footage or something, because you think
I wonder if
would have
there
been,
is.
Or
I think
they
that-
lost
that-
out in the riffing, where they've gone, this film isn't funny, we need to add some scenes. It might have been at the expense of other things. So, for example, this is a complete hypothesis, I'm not saying this happened, but the scene where he turns up and we see Hugh Hefner and he has a right rant at the Dent character, that seems like a rewrite, that seems like a reshoot. That may well have replaced a straighter scene in which perhaps he did speak. Because it becomes 90% him talking at everybody. It becomes the Eddie Murphy show, which is right in one respect.
because it would have you thinking maybe this would have had some scenes between him and Dent would have established more Dent as a character.
Yeah, I think the big loss is Paul Guilfoyle because he's such a good actor, but the big loss in character terms is Dent. He should have been far
So you would
more
have had
fleshed out.
basically you would have had sort of two main villains.
Removed. I loved Dean Stock. What's he called? Dean. What's the actor called? Dean Stockwell. Sorry, I couldn't think. I was about to say Dean Stockton, and it didn't sound right. Dean Stockwell. Dean Stockwell's a fine actor, and not just Quantum Leap. That's what he's best known for, to certainly our generation. But go and look up his filmography.
Does a lot of stuff with David Lynch as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he's been in so much with such variation that it's almost an insult to him to just talk about Quantum Leap, even though Quantum Leap was so popular. But yeah, I mean, he did a lot of stuff. But frankly, for the basics of this film, get rid of him. You don't need this character in this film. Go straight to the armourer who works for Dent.
He's a plot thing because he's essentially like the pratfall of them. So they're always
but it distances Axel from Dent. We've already got Nielsen distancing him from all of them. So they needed to think about the cast here, and they needed to slim it down, in my opinion. So where do we go from there? So basically the order's going to be, we haven't confirmed that's our bullet, but he knows it's us. he's onto something.
Yeah.
Dean, you need to kill him to see
Yeah.
Stockwell. Okay.
Yeah, he's a cop. We need,
And at the same time, I think he comes across Lutz again and basically comes up with something about being part of a multi-jurisdictional task force, because he's now identified himself as a police officer. He said, I didn't want to because I thought it would piss you off. He's seen what a tough guy this is. And
so that's after the strip club.
Okay, the strip club, I just want to say it's hilarious, because in the first film it was vaguely naughty in an R-rated film. They go to a strip club. It's the opposite of the problem with most of this film, in that a lot of this film is very filters and moodily lit and stuff like that. This is too bright. The first film had like this transgressive feel to it. They've gone to a strip club that they're not supposed to be in as serving on duty police officers. It's nothing evil, but it's certainly like... I guess you would call a sort of code of discipline offence, if you like. And it's very adult, and it's smoky in there, and Axel's loving it. This film is really, in this one, it's really brightly lit. It takes ages to show breasts, but when they do, they keep cutting back to the same woman's breasts, right? And it's almost like, shit, this is meant to be R-rated. Quick, show her tits 4 or 5 times. And it's just quite hilariously poorly lit. For a guy who made a career out of shooting quite moody sex scenes, he has no idea how to shoot a strip club. No idea at all. So I found that quite funny.
I was just surprised this was a 15 certificate. It's like, bloody hell, there's boobs in it.
Yeah, it's just the fact that when you normally have an adult-rated film, if they're in a strip club, there's just boobs happening in the film, and you might get the odd shot of it. This film, the first stripper you see, isn't naked, right? So you immediately look at that and you think, well, this is just a PG or PG-13 version of the film then. Then it cuts to show some boobs, and it cuts back to the same woman several times, almost like it's trying to hit you over the head with, look, she's topless. And it's like, you've overthought this, you've shot it too bright so that we can definitely see them. And it just feels like studio interference, because it's not typically the way Tony Scott filmed these things. It's like the studio went, remember, this is R-rated.
The only thing I'll add, the thing I noticed, what I thought was kind of funny in comparison to the last film, Axel is the one who actually orders a Coke.
Yes.
The other two are drinking straight whiskey.
I noticed that, and if I thought there was more thought in these films, and if it was, say, Martin Brest and the same writers again, I would take that as some sort of sign of growth in Axel. That he's like, no, this is serious. I might not be a serving police officer here, but to all intents and purposes, I'm on the job at the moment.
Whereas the other two are kind of like going or having a bit of like, sod it. This is
because they've been put on traffic duty and they've had to be talked into doing this, which doesn't make sense, because Taggert makes this big noise about, I grew up in the service with Andy, which is total insubordination, but whatever. I don't think the characterisation in this film is particularly consistent, because Axel's an asshole early in this film. And whilst it may be by design, it rubs off on the character in general. And then he goes into a strip club and he's the most professional of them. I don't know. Maybe, because 90% of this film is callbacks, it may even be a callback to the first film. He went into a strip club in a sort of flippant mood in the first film, and immediately there's an armed robbery. So maybe he's like, actually, I better keep my wits about me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do we go? What are they there for? This strip club is owned by the same guy. Yeah.
So they established it's owned by the arms dealer guy.
Yeah.
So that's what we established there, because I think that's basically the actually he was following a lead from Bogomill's things. So he saw the clipping of the strip club, and he asked Jenny about
look into all these different places, who owns them, what's the insurance on them, or he started to figure it might be some inside insurance job.
Yeah, so they figured out like that, and this is how he knows about Dent, because he realised like Dent is like the guy who owns these, so it's like, look into this.
Right. The other thing is I think here he palms some matches.
Yeah.
This is quite, again, Axel is at once more annoying and played by a greater egotist than the first film. But if it does one thing well, I repeat, It's Axel has skills they don't have in the Beverly Hills. They have skills he doesn't have too, but he's much more street level. He's got much more. He's got he knows little tricks, and one of these is how to get fingerprints off something without a big lab.
And then they go and get the this is at Billy's apartment, isn't it?
Which is a silly scene. I don't know what the fuck that's about, but whatever. Billy's plants, like, so what? Pointless scene, but there you go. Apart from the getting the fingerprints, and then they go down to the police, don't they? Because no one's going to be there that time of night to find out who it is.
They get Charles Kane's fingerprint, because it's his fingerprint. They were like, okay, well, Axel's like, this guy ain't charged. I mean, this ain't the guy.
Yeah.
He's like, it's not him because he's too small for I kind of thing. He's like,
yeah, and what I think his argument, and again, there are things in this script to admire. The logic is sound. He just goes, well, if it was him, Bogomill had worked that out really fast because he's so small time.
And the film kind of knows that because the bad guys like completely talk down to him in every city. Like even like when he turns up to meet Axel with Bridget Nielsen's character. Bridget Nielsen's character makes her like, oh yeah, like makes a fucking comment about him like arriving on time for once or something like that.
Yeah.
And makes kind of like an undermining remark. Basically tells us this guy's
he's a patsy.
Yeah.
But the film does have at least the intelligence to show logically how our leads work that out. So whilst I've got a lot of problems with this film being a retread, not funny enough, the ego elements, the forced way of them getting out there, Ronnie Cox's absence being the main driver of the plot rather than any actual story ideas, as I say, Axel's skill set and logical deduction is stronger than the first film. Not much is stronger than the first film, but that is. So all of the businesses have sort of either gone under or they've had the insurance taken off them except the racetrack. So he's now like, well, that's going to be the next target then. It must be about money. It must be inside jobs. And he's with an arms dealer. It's got to be to do with that. It's about arms.
Yes.
And there's a riddle that implicates Kane because the translation, the code of it spells out Carlos, which is Spanish for Charles, and I think he might be of Spanish extraction. And they say at one point he was a poor kid who didn't want to become a poor adult. In other words, he didn't want to be some impoverished Latino, and possibly sort of subject to some kind of racism. So what next?
So yeah, we have obviously we get one of the ones that's foiled. We have a chase scene that goes to the Playboy mansion. We get the embarrassment scene.
Yeah,
and then all this kind of like all the information that you said, and then we get to the racetrack scene where they actually kill Kane to set up to sort of.
Yeah, and you've got Lutz arriving and really taking credit for it all and saying, and explaining quite patronisingly how, not only does he say Carlos, as we know, means Charles, I think he says it 2 or 3 times. See, look. So he's treating everybody like they're idiots. He's taking all the credit for it, and he's not questioned it once. Look.
And he's like, oh, it's solved. So he was shot by one of the security guards, which they use one of their guns to do it. So
yeah,
it makes it look
So Axel notices sort of mud at the stables, and he said, "Well, where's that from?" And they say, "Well, it's from where they go with the horses, and it's the oil field." And that is actually where we saw Bogomill at the start of the film, which I needed explaining to me half an hour ago, but now I've sort of put it together from talking through the film.
We also know gets information from Den because he pickpockets him, and that's where we get this scene with Gilbert Gottfried, who's like his accountant or something like that.
Yeah, he works out as his accountant. Now, what is it? he goes in, and this is very on brand Beverly Hills Cop. Walking in, make some shit up. This is just like going into saying you're a customs officer. This is just like the Beverly Palm Hotel, just like Herpes Simplex 10, just like I've got a bag of irradiated, gun shells and all the rest of it. This is him walking in. Now, what is the information he's got to go in with?
He basically finds out that he's planning on leaving the country, i.e., so obviously they've just done the heist.
Yeah.
So therefore,
he's got something that it's today's date.
So they know that he's going to be leaving the country soon. So this is their last chance to nail him. So they figure out, okay, well, let's go to the oil the oil refinery which he owns. The
guy, his accountant, will have a lot of information on him.
Yeah.
What information? He walks in, plays it's quite a funny scene. Now again, if you don't like Gilbert Gottfried and or Eddie Murphy, you're going to struggle with this scene because it's both of them turned up to 11. But I liked it. I couldn't stand too much of it. It's a bit like Joe Pesci in the Lethal Weapon films. Less is more. You don't want Leo in every scene of the Lethal Weapon films, and I kind of feel this way. It was fine as one scene. But he goes in saying, 25 parking tickets, which they've obviously, because of the police computer, they can correctly make this shit up. It's his wife's car. And he takes some money from him to sort of get rid of it on the computer, but he can't see what he's doing. So he goes into his computer. What's he looking for, Chris?
Just any information, and he finds out that basically there's something about he's planning on leaving the country soon.
Right. I thought he knew that when he walked in.
There's like a load of there's like transfer money. They
can link him to the arms dealer. Is that it?
Yeah.
He's got the hunch he's leaving the country. This is the evidence they need.
So they go to let's go see what's happening at the plant, and basically they're looking at they basically see a lot of trucks, implying that this is going down now. This is going down here. So they go right, well, shootout time, and Billy's got a load of guns in his boots because he's all.
I found this again. This is a microcosm of the problems with the actors at this point. If Judge Reinhold said his ego was going out of control, I think we can see it. I think he was a bit of a breakout star of the first film. He had this engaging sort of boy next door sort of air to him, slightly naive, and I think Judge Reinhold has asked for this. Let me put on this coat and look a badass.
They put a trench coat on, yeah.
I think it looks fucking ridiculous, to be honest.
But so they've got the shootout, and there's not much to say beyond that, other than
Let's go through it then. Right, let's skip it then, basically, because it's another shootout like the end of the first film. We finish the film with just a quick plot point. Axel set up his friend at home, his other detective, Paul Reiser's character, to make a call to get rid of his boss so that when Lutz rings back to Chicago, he can stand in for him, pretend to be his boss, and say, yes, he's on a multi-jurisdictional thing. So at the end of the film, he thanks the boss in Detroit and passes the thing to Foley, and he's completely foul-mouthed, which is brilliant. I just love this boss just in the little scenes we get. There's less of him than last week, even less than last week, but it's good. You make my dick disappear or fall off or itch or stuff, he would say. And he's sent home.
He's perfect for Axel because he's just impervious to his bullshit.
Well, he's impervious to his bullshit. He's harsher. The character doesn't find the Axel character funny, and he's fouler mouthed than Axel, which gives Axel a right to be the way he is. He can be foul mouthed because his boss is even worse. So he now goes home. It's a reprise of the joke from the first film. Trust me, before it goes to credits. You got Bogomill sat there in the chair, having been promoted to chief of police or captain or whatever he is, and he's looking chuffed, just like Felix at the end of License to Kill. And that's it. Just as he leaves, the owners of the house turn up, and that's the end of the film. And I'll just do my first thoughts very, very quickly because I haven't got a lot to add. It's not worthless. I didn't hate it, but it feels more than its running time. It feels more than 99 minutes before credits. It takes an age to get going. I think the plot is all designed around egotistical quirks like Eddie Murphy getting too big for his boots, Judge Reinhold getting too big for his boots, and Ronnie Cox being on the set of RoboCop, which is a real loss because Ronnie Cox is really good. You know, he was stern in the first film to the degree you sort of didn't like him. Then you see him in Star Trek as Edward Jellicoe, and he's a principled prick. And then you see him in RoboCop, and he's a real sociopathic asshole. This guy could do everything, and he's a miss from this film. Whilst I like Taggert and Rosewood together, I think a lot of the dynamic sort of doesn't quite work as well this week, and it all feels a series of contrivances to loosely cobble together something that reminds you of the first film and design itself around their limitations. Like, they don't have Ronnie Cox, so you know they almost kill him, but then tell you immediately he's out of danger. It doesn't work. It's not quite funny enough. But if you like the film, there's enough. If you like the first film, there's enough here that will remind you of it to a degree that you'll probably enjoy it well enough. But let's not get confused. There's only one classic certainly amongst the first two, and this isn't it.
Yeah, so I'll just say I always enjoy it, and I think it's not as good as the first one, but it is what it is. It's just a bigger budget sort of sequel to the first Beverly Hills Cop movie, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, of course it is.
The script's not as tight, but you know, I always have a good time with it at the end of the day. So that's my final thoughts.
Yeah. Now, Becca, any final thoughts, or do you want to go straight to fun facts?
It's fun facts time. I'll be very quick because I got to go.
I know. That's why we're not doing any final thoughts from Becca, because she's happy she said everything. Carry on, Becca.
I've got to go.
Fact us. Fact us.
I got a fact. Okay, so fun facts. Fun fact number one, Hugh Hefner finally makes a very brief cameo in this movie. It was the first film to be shot at the Playboy Mansion. Fun fact number two, of its opening weekend, this film grossed $26 million domestically, which was then the biggest opening weekend in history, beating Indiana Jones, which I think says something. Fun fact number three, Agatha Christie fans will know that this borrows the plot from the famous 1930s story ABC Murders. A, they raid on Adriano's. Again, possibly another reference for Adrian, for Stallone, perhaps. B is Bogomill, obviously. C and D is City Deposit raid, and E is for the Imperial Fields attack. Fun fact number four, 1 hour 42 minutes. It's the shortest of the Beverly Hills Cop films so far. And fun fact number five, and another first, this was actually the first film that Eddie Murphy wrote and produced, obviously apart from his own stand-up shows. So that's my quite thick 5 quick fun facts.
He's not actually sort of listed as a writer on it, sort of. I think it's acknowledged though that.
He developed the story on it.
I think they've
he's
that's
developed
exactly.
the story for.
But again, I thought that is the restrictions of the restrictions of ego. It's like they wanted to film it in London and somewhere else, and he went, "I ain't filming outside America," so they retread the first film.
They wanted him to do like maybe do it for Scotland Yard or something like that, and they thought, heck, no.
Oh, I've read some brilliant. We haven't got time for it now. Maybe we'll talk about it next week. But there are some interesting ideas as to what the second film could have been and the third film. We'll talk about that next week. As for social media, you can find me at the Pasty Kid 1976 on X/Twitter.
Oh, guys, still getting used to that. You can find all the odd episodes on Podbean, and you can find me on Cinematronics on X/Twitter.
What do we even call it? Is it X? I think it's
Well, its official name is X, but I'm just aware if I keep calling it Twitter without referencing its change of thing, that could sound ridiculous.
No, that's it. Like on the BBC website, they always say X, formerly known as Twitter.
The website
it's a bit like
still,
Catch Us on the Wireless.
The website is still Twitter, though, so...
Carrier pigeons.
It's still it's Twitter as far as I'm concerned, but acknowledging that over time new people come to it who never know it as Twitter. So
I think it sounds like a stupid
anyway,
name.
what about
Anyway, yes. So
and
Paris
us?
Notices. Basically, you can support us any one of 3 ways. Listen to us. Thank you very much. Subscribing and leaving a 4-star or 5-star glowing review on whichever platform you're listening to us. Don't forget to like us, review us, rate and share, or leave us with a review if you'd like to. On your podcast, your choice. Obviously, we're on Facebook. Do Expect Us to Talk. Twitter, X, Expect Us to Talk. YouTube, Do Expect Us to Talk. And you can still find all our shows on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podbay, wherever you get your podcatchers. So yeah, thank you very much.
Just one parish notice to add to that. I keep getting emails about this. I don't know how many of you out there still use it, but Stitcher is closing down. So if any of you listen to us via Stitcher, you're going to have to find alternative arrangements in the next few days or week or so, something like that.
Yeah, it's a shame. That's quite a big thing, isn't it? Oh my god.
Well, I've moved over. I don't use Stitcher
Quite a hard
anymore.
blow.
But I'm sure there's some people do because they just out of habit do. If you've got a podcatcher and it works for you,
Yeah,
why
Stitcher's one of
change?
the main ones as well, isn't it? So that's quite a big
It was, but it's going. But I tend Podbean's our home. I tend to use Spotify.
Is the podcast bubble bursting? It's been going on for a while. Is it finally bursting?
No, it's not bursting. There's more podcasts around than there's ever been. Anyway, folks, we're going to call it there, which means, Becca.
Do you expect to talk? We'll return with our review of Beverly Hills Cop 3.